In 1831, in the heart of Georgia, a secret was born in silence, a secret so vile, so unspeakable, it was buried beneath wealth, blood, and the lies of a family no one dared question. The wind whispered across the cotton fields of Wilkerson Manor, carrying with it the faint hum of despair. The plantation itself was a fortress of whitewashed walls, yet inside, the air was thick with unspoken suffering. The Wilkersons were a family of wealth and influence, their names synonymous with power, but behind the manicured gardens and polished silverware lay shadows far darker than the black soil of Georgia. Maria Wilkerson, the white mistress of the manor, was known for her beauty, her sharp mind, and her cold charm. Yet even among whispers of admiration, servants spoke in hushed tones of her unnatural curiosity, the way she watched the enslaved men and women as if measuring something invisible, something that belonged to her alone. Among the enslaved was Elijah, a man whose quiet strength belied his gentle heart. Skilled with numbers, resourceful beyond his years, Elijah had been entrusted with overseeing the accounts of the plantation. He was meticulous, disciplined, and fiercely private. He kept secrets, not out of fear, but out of necessity. In a world where trust could cost a life, discretion was survival. Maria's fascination with Elijah was no secret, though the reasons were hidden, masked by societal rules and polite smiles. On cold nights, she would watch him from the window, tracing his movements with a gaze that both bewitched and threatened. She saw in him not only skill, but an opportunity, a tool to bend fate to her will. It was on a winter's eve, when the world lay under a blanket of fog, that the first signs of their shared, forbidden entanglement appeared. A hush fell over the plantation as whispers spread. Maria was pregnant. The child was not hers alone, and neither was the truth of what had been done to secure it. The night Elijah discovered Maria's plan, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. In candlelight, the ledgers of the Wilkerson fortune revealed more than numbers. They revealed power, corruption, and a web of deceit that stretched farther than anyone could imagine. Maria had been maneuvering quietly, orchestrating the diversion of Elijah's hidden inheritance. Elijah's fortune, painstakingly built through years of clandestine trades and clever investments, was vast. But in a society where a man like him had no legal standing, it was vulnerable. Maria, with charm and menace intertwined, had found a way to claim it, not through force, but through a quiet, insidious manipulation that left no evidence, only absence. That night, Elijah understood the depth of her cunning. The mistress who had claimed his body now sought to claim his future. And somewhere between fear and desperation, he realized that exposing her could destroy him, or worse. The child was born in silence, beneath the creaking rafters of the northern wing, where servants rarely ventured. Wrapped in white linens, the baby's cries were both sweet and unnerving, an innocent sound in a house soaked with sin. Yet in those tiny, blue eyes, Elijah glimpsed something terrifying. The legacy of manipulation, the shadow of inheritance stolen before life could even begin. Maria held the child close, smiling at those who whispered behind closed doors, yet the truth lay in the empty pockets of the ledgers Elijah once guarded. Every coin, every deed, every promise had been subtly diverted, slipping from the hands of the man who had nurtured the family's wealth to the woman who would use it for her own designs. The house, as if alive, seemed to sigh. A mourning of the theft, a witness to betrayal. The servants, though loyal, feared the mistress and the mysteries she carried. They would not speak of what they saw, but the echoes of that night lingered in the corners, in the rustle of curtains, in the clinking of spoons at dinner. Wilkerson Manor's proximity to St. Mary's Church added another layer of protection. The congregation, pious and unquestioning, saw Maria as a devout figure, a pillar of grace. Yet even here, in the sanctuary of faith, whispers traveled along polished pews. The priest himself, though respected, noticed Maria's odd requests, rituals performed at odd hours, prayers muttered in the dead of night. No one dared intervene. The church had its own power, its own secrets buried under years of sermons and charity. And Maria's beauty and cunning ensured that any question raised would be dismissed as slander, envy, or delusion. Elijah, meanwhile, became a shadow within his own life, his grief and fury tempered by fear. To confront Maria directly would be folly. To resist the theft of his fortune would invite ruin. And yet, in the dim candlelight of his quarters, he vowed silently. The truth would emerge, no matter how long it slept beneath the surface. The first omen arrived like a winter wind, subtle yet unmistakable. A fire flickered in the northern wing, extinguished before any alarm could be raised, leaving only the scent of smoke and the trembling of the child. Doors creaked open on their own. Footsteps echoed along empty hallways. And at night, Elijah swore he could hear the whisper of numbers, the ledger's secrets calling to him, reminding him that nothing stolen could remain hidden forever. It was clear. The plantation itself had absorbed the tension, the theft, the injustice. And the house, ancient and watchful, would not let it rest. Something had awakened, something that moved in silence, watching the mistress and her stolen fortune alike, waiting for the reckoning that would inevitably come. Elijah walked through the fields at dawn, the frost crunching beneath his worn boots. The plantation seemed alive, yet suffocating, as if every tree, every column of smoke from the chimneys, were tethered to the crime unfolding within the house. He had no weapons, no allies in law or society, yet he carried the weight of knowledge, a weight heavier than any chain. Maria's manipulation was subtle, surgical. Every friendly gesture, every whispered compliment, every act of seeming generosity was a thread in a web designed to ensnare him. And the child, his child, was the ultimate instrument of that control. She carried it with calculated tenderness, a mask to conceal a predator's intent. Elijah felt the invisible chains of the world tighten. Society itself was an accomplice. Laws rendered him powerless. Church and state offered only a veneer of protection for the guilty. He realized that if he wished to reclaim what was rightfully his, he would have to step into darkness, to navigate corridors of deceit and human cruelty that few had ever dared to enter. One night, under the pretense of tending the storeroom, Elijah slipped into the room where Maria kept her private accounts. Candlelight flickered across ink-stained pages, revealing transactions so carefully disguised that they seemed almost supernatural. Wealth, once his, had been siphoned into shell accounts, dummy estates, and the pockets of strangers who existed only on paper. The ledger trembled in his hands, not from fear alone, but as if the room itself were alive, warning him of the danger. Every page was a testament to cunning, a roadmap of betrayal, a proof that Maria had not merely stolen fortune. She had rewritten destiny itself. A faint noise made him freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and slow, echoed from the hall. The child's cry, soft, almost imperceptible, added to the oppressive tension. For a moment, time seemed suspended. The ledger was no longer paper. It was a confession, a weapon, and a curse all at once. Outside the manor, the town of Savannah was alive with rumors, the faint pulse of secrets buried beneath polite conversation. Merchants spoke of sudden wealth appearing in the hands of the Wilkerson family. Servants at other estates noticed odd shipments, mysterious travelers, and accounts that no one could fully explain. Yet no one dared speak directly. Fear was a silent guardian of Maria's secret. And as Elijah observed the town from a distance, he realized that the corruption was not limited to Wilkerson Manor. It had spread like roots underground, entwining commerce, church, and family. The entire community had become a silent accomplice, unknowingly or unwillingly, to the theft that had transformed his life. Among the servants, one figure remained unusually observant, an elderly woman named Ruth. She had labored at Wilkerson Manor longer than anyone could remember, her eyes carrying the weight of decades of unnoticed horrors. She had seen Maria's cunning unfold, had witnessed Elijah's growing despair, and had even noted the subtle ways the child mirrored his father's features, though Maria insisted otherwise. Ruth spoke rarely, but when she did, her voice trembled with truth. She warned Elijah, "The house remembers. The world may forget, but it will not forgive." He dismissed her words at first as superstition, but slowly, as shadows seemed to move on their own, as whispers filled empty hallways, he began to understand the gravity of her warning. The tension finally reached a breaking point one stormy evening. Rain lashed the windows, lightning illuminating the sharp angles of Wilkerson Manor. Elijah confronted Maria in the nursery, holding the ledger like a talisman of justice. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Why take everything I built? Why claim what is not yours?" Maria smiled, a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Because power belongs to those who can take it," she replied calmly, as if stating an unassailable law. "You had the fortune, yes, but I have the child, and with it, I have the world." Fear and fury clashed within Elijah. He understood then that Maria's ambition was boundless, that her cunning had no limit, and that the child, the innocent embodiment of both their lives, was now a tool in a game he had only just begun to comprehend. After that stormy night, Wilkerson Manor no longer felt like a home. The walls seemed to breathe, inhaling fear and exhaling whispers. Elijah walked its halls and felt the gaze of unseen eyes. Shadows shifted in ways that no candle could explain, and the sound of tiny footsteps, sometimes his child's, sometimes not, echoed long after the nursery was empty. He began to dream of figures cloaked in candlelight, of numbers and ledgers twisting into grotesque forms, of Maria smiling with a triumph that reached beyond mortal cruelty. The house itself seemed to punish him, as if aware of his knowledge and angry at his defiance. Each night brought visions more vivid, more unbearable, until he could no longer tell where fear ended and reality began. Determined to reclaim what was his, Elijah sought allies outside the manor. Under the cover of darkness, he visited Ruth, the old servant who had long observed Maria's schemes. She revealed that the Wilkerson family had a tradition of secret covenants, agreements buried in church records, property deeds, and private ledgers, designed to protect wealth from men like him. "They bind the living and the unborn," Ruth whispered, eyes flickering nervously. "This child, he carries not just your blood, but the chains of their design. To reclaim anything, you must play their game, but it is not a game for the faint of heart." Elijah listened, heart pounding. The stakes were clear. Maria's cunning was institutionalized, her theft sanctioned by a system older and more insidious than he had imagined. Days passed, and the child grew, seemingly innocent, yet strangely perceptive. Elijah noticed how the baby would cry when Maria's eyes glimmered with deceit, how he would calm in her presence, yet stiffen when Elijah approached. It was as if the child sensed the tension, the stolen legacy, and the unspoken violence that haunted both of them. Elijah understood then that the child was not merely a victim, but a living symbol of the corruption that Maria had wrought, a constant reminder that the future had been rewritten in secret. Every lullaby sung, every gentle touch, every whispered command was part of a web he could not yet unravel. Ruth spoke of a ritual, a symbolic act performed by the Wilkersons for generations to secure wealth and influence. It involved deception, manipulation, and the quiet erasure of rightful claims. The ritual was not mystical in the conventional sense, but its power lay in secrecy, fear, and the lawless exploitation of society's blind spots. Elijah began to see the signs in the ledger, in Maria's movements, and in the way the town unwittingly abetted her schemes. She performed the ritual daily, not with candles or chants, but with charm, with manipulation, and with the silent complicity of a community too afraid or too blinded to intervene. In a daring act, Elijah tried to intercept the flow of his wealth. He met with traders, documented assets, and attempted to assert legal claim, but every attempt was blocked by invisible forces, forged deeds, bribed officials, and the unspoken rule that a black man had no legal power in Georgia of 1831. Each failure crushed him, and yet it also sharpened his resolve. He began to understand that the battle was not only for the child or the fortune, but for truth itself. The lie had been woven so tightly into the fabric of society that exposing it would require ingenuity, courage, and the willingness to confront horrors no one had ever dared name aloud. Maria, aware that Elijah was stirring beneath the surface, began to change. Her charm became sharper, her patience thinner. At night, she whispered to the child in ways that unsettled even the oldest servants. Doors slammed without wind. Mirrors reflected shadows that did not belong. Elijah noticed cracks in her carefully constructed persona, sudden flashes of rage, the tremor in her hands when confronted with the ledgers, the obsessive attention to details that only someone desperate to maintain control would exhibit. Madness was creeping in, not only around the edges, but at the core of Maria's being. Winter had thickened its grip on the plantation. Frost etched the windows like icy lace, and the cotton fields lay barren, silent witnesses to the unfolding nightmare. Elijah could no longer hide in shadows. He had to act. The ledger, heavy with stolen fortune, burned metaphorically in his hands. It was a record of betrayal, a map to Maria's deceit, and perhaps the only weapon left to reclaim what had been stolen. The night he decided to confront Maria openly, the house itself seemed to groan in anticipation. Floorboards shifted under invisible weight, doors creaked as if warning intruders away, and distant footsteps echoed like a chorus of judgment. Fear mingled with resolve. Elijah understood. This confrontation would decide not only wealth, but lives, innocence, and the legacy of all those trapped within Wilkerson Manor. Section 18. The Child's Silence. The child, now nearly a year old, had grown perceptive beyond his age. He would cry when deceit hovered in the air and smile when truth lingered, as if sensing forces invisible to adults. Elijah realized the child was both a blessing and a curse, the symbol of stolen heritage and the key to exposing it. Maria, aware of this subtle awakening, became increasingly possessive. Her smiles were sharper, her glances more calculating. She attempted to manipulate even the child's responses, whispering lies into his ears, teaching him obedience to her will. Yet, despite her efforts, the child's presence became an omen of justice, an unintentional witness to the corruption that had poisoned the very heart of the Wilkerson estate. Section 19. The Final Confrontation. One storm-laden night, Elijah approached Maria in the grand hall. Candlelight flickered across the walls, casting grotesque shadows. The ledger was open, its pages whispering secrets. Rain hammered the windows, echoing the rhythm of hearts caught in fear and rage. "Enough," Elijah said, voice firm but trembling. "Listen tonight. The truth will not be buried." Maria laughed softly, a sound that dripped like venom. "The truth belongs to those who shape it," she replied, voice eerily calm. "And I have shaped it perfectly." For a moment, silence reigned. Then the storm seemed to surge, rattling windows and doors, as if the house itself had taken sides. In that moment, Elijah understood. The battle was no longer between two people. It was between justice and the dark machinery of secrecy, power, and greed that had thrived for decades. In the days that followed, the manor became a place of whispers and shadows. Servants spoke of doors slamming on their own, of objects moving inexplicably, of the persistent feeling of being watched. The child's cries were sharper, more urgent, echoing the stolen legacy within the walls. Maria's grip on the fortune, on the child, and on the narrative began to falter. The ledger, once hidden, was slowly revealed to lies and outsiders. Elijah's persistence began to unravel the carefully constructed illusion. Though the final reckoning would take time, the house had already begun to exact justice. The story of Wilkerson Manor, of Maria and Elijah, of a stolen fortune and a child born of deceit, became a whispered legend. One that reminded all who heard it. Some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, will not remain hidden, and some houses will remember.